It's now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenters. We have Mark Bushy and Dale Lisinski. I'd love to invite Dale to just say a few words.
Oh, thanks very much, Jamie. Very excited to be part of this presentation and DeVal Safety. Certainly, just a little background on DeVal Safety. We are one of the premier distributors in the United States when it comes to a safety supply partner. We have a very simple way that we come to market, which is up on the screen right now. We are devoted to the safety of your employees, devoted to the safety of your employees, which means we're here to assist you in getting them home to their kitchen table each night. And the other part of that way we come to market is that we are committed to the bottom line of our clients, which means to accomplish the former, you need to invest to protect those employees. And our job, the way we look at it, is to make sure that that is a proper and prudent investment, not investing too much and certainly not investing too little, so you can accomplish getting those employees home to their kitchen table. So we have been one of the leaders in the market as far as education goes and bringing the education and potential solutions to our clients. And that's why we're excited to be teamed up with Kimberly-Clark and smart guys like Mark today, because that's what this is all about, is educating the market so people make the right decisions, have the proper protection, and also are protecting their bottom line with their assets as far as protecting those most important human assets. So excited to be here and looking forward to it. I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Great. Thank you, Dale. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining today, and Dale and Jamie, thanks for the opening remarks there. Really why everyone's here is to really help, we want to help you understand how to select the right disposable apparel to really protect your employees. This really isn't the easiest topic out there. There's a lot of questions that should be asked on a regular basis that maybe aren't being asked. So we want to really kind of guide that conversation and help you all really be informed consumers and users of disposable apparel and really ask the right questions. This webinar today, we're not going to really try to simplify things to the point where you might be making some poor decisions at the end of the day. We really want to make sure that you're armed with the right questions to ask at the end of the day. There's a lot of parties out there who can help you make these decisions, so it's important that we arm you with the correct questions to ask. So really, when you all leave this webinar today, there's a couple key takeaways that we want you to leave with. The first is why do we even wear disposable suits and protective apparel? We want to make sure we're clear on why that usage even happens. What's the need out there in the marketplace? The second big bucket is how do we choose the correct protective apparel? Like I mentioned before, there are a ton of questions that should be asked on a regular basis. What I see from my experience, not a lot of these questions are being asked, and at the end of the day, that's putting workers at risk. So we want to make sure we're asking the right informed questions. And then last is really from my experience and from others' experience, where PPE selection, in particular with disposable suits, falls short. These are kind of the last really 5 big takeaways that, if nothing else, these are things you want to look out for as you're making your disposable apparel selection. And then last but not least, we'll try to address some questions as time allows here at the end of the webinar. So when we kick off, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this, because you all probably wouldn't be part of a safety webinar unless you really truly believe in safety. But as Dale alluded to, really, the big point here is employees are your greatest asset, and they really need to return home every night in the same shape as they arrived. That's really the core of safety. Dale alluded to it earlier. That really is why we practice safety. Working for Kimberly-Clark, as many of you probably know, Kimberly-Clark is a global manufacturer. And with global manufacturing comes really a culture of safety. And that culture of safety isn't really prevalent not just in our mills, but also the office environment, right? There is an environment here that if you're not wearing your seatbelt on campus or you're texting as you're walking down the stairs, a lot of times people will let you know, say, hey, that's an unsafe behavior, and they'll give you the feedback. They want to give you that feedback before a true safety incident happens. And my guess is many of your companies have a similar safety culture in place, because it truly is that important. And the other big aspect of that is, yes, we want people to return home every night in the same shape as which they came. But the other thing is there's other implications to a safe workplace. Some of them being workers tend to be more productive. They tend to be more happy and fulfilled. No one wants to come to work in a place where they may get injured. They may suffer, a serious injury or potentially, a fatality. That's not what anyone wants to come to work to see and take part in. The other big thing is really cost reduction and cost avoidance. Yes, our people are definitely the most important thing, but everyone knows that safety incidents are very, very expensive from a incident standpoint, as well as potentially, brand reputation and things of those sort. The cost can really be instrumental in or huge in terms of the implications of a safety incident. So I think we're pretty clear that safety is important, and we really want to make sure that our workers are safe every single day. So I think many of you are probably familiar with kind of the safety pyramid. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I think it's important to get us grounded. When you look at the left-hand side, at the bottom here are the at-risk behaviors. There are hundreds of thousands of at-risk behaviors that happen every day and every year. An at-risk behavior, like I mentioned before, is potentially driving around campus without your seatbelt on, or texting as you're walking down the stairs, putting your hand near a machine. The important thing there is we don't want this pyramid to progress upwards. As you can see there at the very top is the fatality. That is the absolute worst thing that can happen in terms of safety. So what the important thing is, through a safety culture and a lot of really processes and procedures in place, we want to try to address things at the at-risk stage. So this is really, really important to, it's not one thing that you want to sit back and say, I see John over there doing something unsafe, but I don't want to bother him. He's busy in his work. No, the right thing to do is to say something, because the last thing you want is to have a recordable, have a fatality happen because of that 1 millisecond where something that could have happened. So we really want to pay attention and really address these at-risk behaviors before they escalate further. The other right-hand side, and again, no one likes to talk about this side of safety, but really when it comes to fatalities, you see a lot of the breakout here in terms of transportation, falls, and slips. I did circle and highlight the third one because I think that's important to our conversation today. There are a lot of individuals that are exposed to harmful substances or environments every day, and disposable apparel, disposable suits are one way to protect against that. So really that one, 722 fatalities on an annual basis for that is way too many. And anything we can do there to protect our workers is really what we need to be doing in the long run. The other thing, again, this is probably another reverse pyramid that many folks have seen before, but it's really the importance of PPE. I think from my experience, one of the things I see most in the environments is there are a lot of kind of pressure put on PPE. A lot of people put a lot of stock in PPE, that it is really the thing that's going to protect their workers first and foremost. Well, it's actually the reverse of that. When we talk about safety, there's a lot of ways that we can really make the workplace safer before you get to PPE. Yes, PPE definitely has a role and has a purpose, but truthfully, that's kind of the last resort. We want to try to do as many things up top in this pyramid as we can before we get to PPE. So in this circumstance, we want to eliminate the hazard. We want to substitute out the hazard. We want to isolate people from the hazard through engineering controls, or we want to change the way people work. My analogy that I like to use with this one is really driving a car. Inherently, driving a car isn't the safest thing in the world, but at the end of the day, the PPE equivalent there is you have airbags. So this basically, if you only count on PPE and the fail-safe last thing, you essentially would be driving your car erratically, hoping that your airbags protect you at the end of the day. I don't know about you, but that's potentially not the best strategy. There are things you can do, like following the speed limit, buckling your seatbelt. There's a lot of these things out there that we can do ahead of time before you rely on that fail-safe thing after the accident occurs, in this case, airbags. So yes, PPE is very important, but really asking these questions, monitoring behavior, trying to eliminate the hazards ahead of time can really go a long way in creating a safe workplace. So when we start talking about disposable apparel, the one thing that's really important, yes, we realize there that we're going to try to eliminate a lot of the hazards before we get to PPE, but if you absolutely need PPE and need to have that last line of protection for your workers, there's a reason that we're wearing disposable apparel, and that's really to protect your skin. So I think many of you know, and you've probably been hearing this since high school and middle school health class, but skin is really the largest organ in your body. The average human has about 22 square feet of skin, and skin serves a very very, very important role. It helps us to insulate the body. It helps to protect the body. But at the end of the day, this is one of the hardest things to protect purely because of the amount of surface area you have all over your body. So skin can be very, very difficult, and that's where the disposable apparel really comes into play. The other big nugget of information here is that work-related skin diseases account for approximately 50% of occupational illnesses and are responsible for an estimated 25% of lost work days. There is a serious implication here in terms of lost work days cost for not wearing disposable apparel. These skin diseases can be very, very serious, from burns to abrasions on the skin, things that disposable apparel will help solve. It's a huge problem that we see in the marketplace. And last but not least, we also see that the average number of workers out there, it's about 13 million workers in the U.S., are potentially exposed to chemicals that can be absorbed through the skin. And that's a staggering number. And at the end of the day, those are the folks that are really primed to wear disposable suits to really protect themselves against those hazards. So again, disposable apparel can be used really a lot of places in the marketplace, but it's really important that it gets worn because skin is such a large organ, it covers so much surface area, and the hazards here are very, very prevalent. So as we kind of jump into the presentation in terms of the meat and some of the key questions we really ultimately need to ask as we're selecting the right type of PPE, and in this case more particularly disposable apparel, one of the first things we want to start with is, what is the hazard? If you're just asking, if you really don't know what the hazard is in your environment, that's probably a problem. Right? We need to know what the hazard is. And generally what we see in the marketplace is there are three main buckets of hazards and when it comes to disposable apparel. The first is dry particulate. So this is really kind of your standard dry dirt and dust and things of that sort. The second big bucket is liquid. We know that liquids are all over the environment, whether that's water, that's oil, that's grease. Liquids are also another big hazard that we face. And the last thing, which I alluded to earlier, is chemicals. We know in a lot of manufacturing spaces, chemicals are used on a regular basis. So these are really your three buckets of hazards. Not to say that's all of them, but these are the three most common ones that we see in the marketplace. And when it comes to hazards, there's a couple key criteria you need to ask yourself in terms of what you expect from your apparel. Ultimately, do you want to keep your workers clean? You're obviously going to make a different decision if the point of the apparel purely is to keep the worker clean. But the other big bucket there is keep me protected. There is a lot of times a reason folks are wearing apparel that we really touched on earlier from a safety standpoint, and that's to keep them protected, whether it's hazardous dust, whether it's hazardous liquids, whether it's hazardous chemicals. So those are really two important fundamental questions. What is the hazard, and is this being used to keep me clean or keep me protected? Because at the end of the day, those are probably going to lead to two very different solutions depending on what your point of view is on those key questions. So jumping in a little bit more on the dry particulate side, when we start talking about hazard identification, that first question is going to be very, very key. Is this being used to protect the person, or is it being used to keep them clean? That will lead to two very, very different, most likely, decision points in terms of what you'll end up with in terms of your suit. The other big question here is, not all dry particulates are the same. And one of the big questions we need to ask is, what is the size of the particle? How many microns? So microns is really the scientific term of how we measure the different size of dry particles. The hard thing about this, though, is that the eye can generally see particles that are only greater than 40 microns. And if you see on the chart on the right, these are just some common substances that we see and their size in microns. There are a lot of things that we're trying to protect against that the human eye cannot see. And that truthfully makes it very, very difficult. It's to a certain extent can be hard to put your trust in something when you can't see the particle whatsoever. So really understanding that, what is the size of the particle, what is the size in microns, really will help you make a strong decision. And then the other big component here is the particle hazardous? You will make very different decisions if you know a particle is hazardous. For example, on that list on the right, you see things like anthrax and asbestos. We know those are in the news all the time in terms of being hazardous. So we want to take different precautions. What I would say is one of my learnings that I've seen in the marketplace is dry particulates is one of those areas where people tend to probably overprescribe PPE. because they truly don't know, as much details about the size of the particle, what the application is, whether it's hazardous. So these are some of the key questions that we need to ask, because at the end of the day, you might be able to get into a more cost-effective suit, or even just a suit that will perform better for your need. So these are the key questions that we need to ask when we start talking about dry particulates. When it comes to liquids, really a similar line of questioning. The first thing is it used to keep them clean, or is it used to protect the person? So if you're just going out in your driveway and power washing the driveway with just water, that's going to be potentially a little bit different. You're probably just wearing that garment to keep you clean. If water happens to get in, maybe not the biggest deal in the world, you're just a little wet. Whereas if you're using some sort of chemical or other type of liquids, protecting the person can be very key. So understanding that difference is going to be huge. The next big question is really, what is the substance being sprayed? There's a lot of times that we hear that it's some sort of liquid we don't really know. Well, this is one part that you really need to be in tune with, of what really is the liquid being used. What are the implications of that liquid? How is it being sprayed? Obviously, something coming out at a low-grade mist is going to be different than something that comes in at high velocity, say, like out of a power washer. So understanding the real environment that the liquid's coming really makes a big deal. And same thing like we talked about with the dry particulate. Is the liquid hazardous? This will make a huge difference in the decision criteria and the decision that you make when it comes to disposable apparel. So understanding whether it's hazardous or not makes a huge, huge difference. And then the last big bucket that we talked about is really from a chemical standpoint. The one thing that we see over and over again with chemicals is you need to know what chemical is being used. And I'd say generally in the marketplace, we see that most people do have a pretty good handle on what chemicals are being used in their process. The one that's a little bit more difficult is the actual concentration of that chemical. A concentration can make a world of difference. Whether it's 10% diluted, 90% diluted, it makes a very big difference in which suit and which PPE you will select. So one thing to keep in mind with the chemical is really concentration. That's something to really look at and understand. The other big question here is the duration the workers are exposed to the chemical. If someone is potentially just maybe going to get splashed every once in a while, you're going to make a very different decision than if someone's practically soaking their arms or soaking their bodies in that chemical for an extended period of time. Again, we hope that no one's sitting in a chemical for an extended period of time and you used some of those other safety items like removing the hazard before that gets there. But, at the end of the day, that's something to really look out for. You're going to make very different decisions with your PPE, whether it's just incidental splash versus something you're going to be exposed to for a long amount of time. And then with chemicals, the other big question we have is, does the suit need to protect against both the liquids and the gaseous vapors? So this is really a key question to ask, especially when we start talking chemicals. We know that some of these chemicals, the gases can be incredibly dangerous. And when we start talking about protecting against the vapors and the gases themselves, one thing we generally think of is the seam of the garment. A lot of times the seam can be where vapors can get in the quickest. So you start talking things about like tape seams, something to protect against those vapors a little bit more. So understanding truly with those chemicals, is it just the liquid, or is it the liquid or the vapor, or a combination of the two? Those are key questions to really ask as you're addressing kind of your PPE needs. The other thing, we talked really quickly there about kind of what the hazard is and breaking them into the three big categories. The other thing is most folks are really looking at PPE through a very different lens than some of their peers. So if you're a safety manager, for example, you're going to be looking at your selection of PPE very differently than, say, the procurement person who might be solely focused on cost. I know many of you operate in environments that have many different stakeholders every day, so selecting apparel isn't always the easiest thing. A lot of times you have to get alignment from all of these different functions, a lot of these different stakeholders. But the one thing we know, and this is something that you hear in business all the time, what gets rewarded gets done. So if someone's being rewarded, for example, a safety manager is being rewarded on no incidents, they're going to make different decisions than potentially someone who's very focused on cost and bottom line. Again, we hope that no one's sacrificing their employees' safety for cost, but we know every day there's a lot of demands on our businesses that we make different decisions. And again, you're not trying to put your workers in jeopardy, but at the end of the day, these are some of the decisions that need to ultimately get made. Same thing with quality, productivity, sustainability. These are a lot of the what we call kind of the big 5 KPIs that we see out in the industry on an everyday basis. So we really want to really focus our questions here on out in terms of how to select PPE based on these different functions and based on these different sensitivities that we have from a KPI standpoint. So probably the first one and the easiest to comprehend, since we've already talked about it quite a bit, is actually the safety person. So if you're an EH&S manager, someone solely concerned with safety of your workforce, the main question that's driving your behavior is how do we keep our employees safe? That's going to be the most important thing. You're trying to reduce and minimize or totally eliminate recordable incidents in your workplace. So like we talked about before, the main questions there are what hazards are present, right? It's something that you really want to take inventory of, really what hazards are out there. Is someone going to be susceptible to dry dust in one part of the facility, liquids in the others, chemicals in the other? That's something that you really want to take time, spending time in your facility, really understanding truly what are the hazards. And it's worth spending some time, kind of playing the what if game a little bit. So, you can walk around and say, what if this happens? What if this person goes to an area where maybe they shouldn't be? What process and control can we put in place? Understanding those hazards are really, really important. And then once you have those hazards, you start thinking, and this is where that what if game comes, how do you prevent them? How do you actually get to the point where you're eliminating some of those hazards before really PPE comes into play? That's a lot of the things that we want to be working on from a safety standpoint. And then, like I said before, if you ultimately get to the end of the road and PPE is kind of your last resort, what you need to do is understand what suit works best. And I'll be one of the first to tell you that sometimes making a suit selection isn't the easiest. And this is one that it's nice to know that you're really not on your own. A lot of folks feel very, very overwhelmed about making any sort of PPE selection because at the end of the day, it's a pretty serious selection. If you're not making the right choice, potentially someone could get injured. But there are a lot of folks in the industry out there to help you. And so really in the blue boxes on the bottom are just some kind of watch outs and recommendations that I would make if you're really solely focused on safety. Have your distributor and manufacturer sales representative take a hazard walk. I know, as Dale mentioned before, DeVal really focuses their efforts on really being an industry leader in safety, and they can advise you on things. Same thing with Kimberly-Clark. We have sales folks out in the field, and we will walk around your facility, and our team is very well trained and very well versed in pointing out any hazards that they see. The one thing that we say, we're not necessarily always out there trying to sell something. If we see something, for example, that's very unsafe when it comes to fall protection, Kimberly-Clark is not offering anything for sale when it comes to fall protection, but we really believe that we need to be helping our customers really meet and sustain a safe workplace. So we will point out that hazard and say, hey, Kimberly-Clark doesn't offer it, but potentially DeVal offers a fall safety protection. That's something that's really of value that both your manufacturer sales rep as well as your distributor can bring to the table. Use them as a resource. Pick their brains about what they see in other facilities. Where can you potentially be safer? The other big important attribute here is to review technical information and regulations. So many ourselves and many of our competitors, we all largely publish technical information. So a lot of physical testing about the suits, the fabrics, and what really purpose they're meant to do. Spend some time with that information and ask questions. It's nothing to be embarrassed about to ask questions. In my role as a category manager, I answer and address a lot of questions every day from a technical side of things. In this facility with this hazard, what is the best recommendation? Will our technical data stand up? These are a lot of the questions that I address on an everyday basis, and I know distributors also are able to help address a lot of these questions. So really spend some time with the technical information and really ask questions. It's nothing to be ashamed of to ask some questions. And then the last, probably one of the most important things that you can do is, yes, you can do a lot of your due diligence, take a hazard walk, review the technical information. There is a lot to be said for just trialing and testing different coverall products in your space. The hardest thing about PPE selection, especially when it comes to disposable suits, is every work environment is very different. Even if you're using the same chemicals, the way you're using them, potentially the way employees are interacting with them are going to be very different facility by facility, segment by segment. So each individual customer is very unique. So that's really where trialing and testing the product. It might work well for one circumstance, but not for yours. So understanding that, getting product in your hand, testing out really is half the battle here to really make sure that you get the right thing in your hand. When it comes to Kimberly-Clark, one of the ways that we actually talk about kind of our safety of our line as well as the protection that you're going to get is we actually have everything kind of under the CleanGuard brand name. But as you can see here, we build up our portfolio. So as we broke them into kind of the main buckets before of hazards, we start at the bottom here and we have dry particulate protection at our A10. And as we build up, generally the protection level as well as what it protects against elevates to the point where you get to the A80, we're protecting against some very harsh chemicals as well as some of the vapors that we talked about before. So our hierarchy is very much designed to make this safety choice a little bit easier. You know that as you go up in the numbers, the protection is going to get a little bit better. And I know many of our competitors follow a similar type hierarchy to make it very easy. We know how hard it can be to make decisions at the end of the day, so we're trying to make it as easy as we potentially can from a nomenclature and naming standpoint to make that decision just a little bit easier. Another example that we want to talk about with safety is what we did with our CleanGuard A45 garment. So what we saw before, this is a newer garment to the marketplace. It's probably been out for 3 or more years. But what we saw was there was really kind of a missing part in our portfolio where we were really addressing a key need that we saw. And that was really around kind of the painting and finishing marketplace. So if you think about the aerospace industry, for example, there is a lot of painting and finishing that happens on airplanes before they get sold. What we saw a lot of times was workers truly just weren't as protected as maybe they should have been. So we actually spent the time of working with some customers and innovating a specific suit that can really keep out isocyanates and chromates, some of the nasty things associated with painting. We also spent time with the customers in understanding that a respirator is often worn in this environment. So a respirator fit hood would be needed for this type of garment. Same thing with the zipper. We know that a zipper could potentially be an area where some of those paints could get through. We wanted to make some extra precautions and do water-resistant zippers. So this is one example that Kimberly-Clark's doing. A lot of other coverall manufacturers in the marketplace are really focused on safety, and a lot of the mindset that we make is really how to make the garment and how do we make the suit more safe for the workers who are ultimately going to be wearing them. So I think this is a really important piece, and this is something that someone, a Kimberly-Clark sales representative would be happy to walk you through. Here's how it's going to make your worker a little bit safer, and here are the features and benefits to do that. So safety is obviously one key component to selecting PPE. Another big KPI that we're focused on is really quality. We know that in every facility, if you're manufacturing anything, there is a lot of stakeholders involved to make sure that the output of the production is really spot on, that there are no issues with the output. So when it comes to selecting disposable apparel, what we really want to make sure we're doing from a manufacturing distributor standpoint, we don't want to cause concerns for your process. Right? Everything that we put into your process, we don't want that to impact the output whatsoever. And we take a lot of pride and a lot of care in making sure that's the case. So when it comes to disposable suits, for example, will a suit break down and tear, leaving FOD in our process? I brought up the aerospace example beforehand, but if your suit and your fabric falls apart for whatever reason, or there's threads that come loose that could get on the airplane, that's a big concern. Same thing with a suit leaving lint in the process. You hear a lot about painting, potentially in the automotive industry. Just leaving lint from a coverall can cause a lot of rework in the process. And rework, as we know, is expensive. And at the end of the day, we don't want cars coming off the line that have kind of different fisheyes and things of that sort that really isn't desirable for the end user. So that really comes into the output standpoint. Same thing with threads and other components. When you start thinking about food processing as a segment, for example, some of these things like will components fall off in the process and end up in a box of cereal? That's obviously something that you do not want. So really asking these questions and really being upfront about your quality goals and what you're looking for is really, really important. And having that dialogue with both your distributor partner, your manufacturer, sales representative will be really key. And a lot of the things here are very similar to what we saw before with safety. It's really important to review the technical data sheets and the physical properties, but also trial and testing the different coverall options. You may see something when you're spending a lot of time trialing a product that could be an issue, that could be a concern. It's important to get that out of the way when you're closely monitoring what you're doing with it before it gets into full usage in your facility, because quality, we know, is very, very important. The other thing that we see a lot of times is we know that the input going in, so for example, wearing a suit can have potentially negative ramifications if things go wrong downstream. But there are some things in place really to help make sure the quality of coveralls and other PPE is really up to code and up to standard. So here are just two of many standards that we have in the apparel marketplace. ANSI standards, for example, ANSI, this particular standard that's mentioned here, the ANSI 101 1996, is really the sizing standard that's kind of the market norm. So in this circumstance, we're saying the industry is saying that we're going to make to a certain pattern with a certain minimum sizing to ensure that at the end of the day the worker is going to be comfortable, the product's going to be labeled appropriately. These standards help give you a little bit of peace of mind in your selection. Same thing, another one that we'll call out specifically is the ASTM standard, and in this case the one that's specifically focused on is ASTM F1670. So this is actually a test if you're worried about having blood in your process or coming in contact with blood. That particular standard helps say, yes, it's going to keep out that blood material. That's nothing that you need to worry about. And so these standards really help ensure that you're getting a quality product, a quality coverall coming into your process, so at the end of the day it doesn't impact your quality coming off the line. Another example of kind of how Kimberly-Clark does this, and we pride ourselves on being a quality company. This is one of probably our greatest attributes is we provide high quality products to the marketplace. And one of the things we really focus on is kind of our non-wovens expertise. So we really have a lot of our own manufacturing assets where we can make most of the fabrics that go into our coveralls that we sell to the marketplace. So we have really 50 plus years of non-wovens expertise, and that Huggies box in the upper right hand corner might seem a little odd, but Kimberly-Clark does make Huggies diapers, and believe it or not, some of the same non-woven or similar non-woven technology that we use in diapers, we've been fine-tuning and really refining that process to the point where we're making very high quality apparel garments because of this expertise. And so what you'll see here, the vast majority of our coverall styles are A10, A20, A30, all meant for dry particulate. Our A40 and A60 meant for liquid are all produced on Kimberly-Clark assets. And it's one thing that we have confidence in our own team that we're able to produce quality products. So this is something that we really feel strongly about, feel proud about, that we actually can maintain quality. So some of those things we talked about before, the material falling apart, having issues, we feel very confident in our production process, especially since it's a Kimberly-Clark owned asset, Kimberly-Clark employees that are making this, that we feel very, very strongly about our quality going in, which makes us feel even better about your quality coming out. The other big aspect that some people kind of gloss over, but you truly cannot ignore this, because we know that cost is really a prevailing thing that's in the marketplace every day. Every single customer, every single distributor, everyone is trying to maximize their cost position and really make sure that we're hitting kind of those bottom line numbers. And the question here when it comes to cost is, how do we maximize our bottom line? And some of these questions here, at the end of the day, you need to be very careful. Yes, we know cost is very important, but the thing you don't want to do is you don't want to make sacrifices to the point where you're jeopardizing your employee or your process for the sake of cost. Yes, everyone needs to hit a number, but those are things that really aren't necessarily negotiable. Again, everyone needs to go home every night the same way they came. So just to say, oh yeah, but I saved $1, but John went home hurt, probably not the direction you want to go. But the other question really is, how do we maximize the value of our suits? If you're really concerned about cost, these are important questions to ask. So the first thing and the first kind of watch out or recommendation I would make is to really understand where you can save costs without sacrificing quality and jeopardizing the process and your people. So a lot of times what we often see is sometimes you just go to your distributor partner and say, hey, I need a white suit. Well, Kimberly-Clark, our competitors, there's probably 15 different styles of white suits out there that you can get. And, it like we've talked about today, it can be a pretty complicated environment and a complicated portfolio across the board, that at the end of the day, a distributor may not know as much, or an end user may not know as much about what they truly want. So just asking for a white suit, you might end up ultimately with something that is a little bit over-engineered for truly what you need. So that's the other big watch out. Make sure you're paying for what you need. There is a lot of kind of overprotection, I'd say, in the marketplace, where generally people don't know as much about maybe they should when they're making their decision criteria. So ultimately, they just get in something that they know 100% will protect them, which, there's nothing wrong with that. But generally what you'll find is you can pay a lot more for that. So really, truly understanding what are the hazards. Is this to keep me clean or keep me protected? Asking those questions ahead of time, having good dialogue with your distributor partner and your sales rep will really, really guide you to make sure you're in the right suit to really maximize the cost position that you have. One story that's pretty interesting when it comes to cost, we actually, Kimberly-Clark sells globally through our coverall business, but one of our regions, the Latin American region in LAO, they really have a kind of a different, what we see there is a kind of a different mentality when it comes to safety. They are a very cost conscious region for us, and what that means is ultimately people start wearing disposable suits for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, when these are meant to be used for a couple hours and then disposed. So what you end up happening is they're so cost conscious that they're really sacrificing the quality and jeopardizing their process all for the sake of cost. And that's the last thing we want to see. People go to the extent even of sometimes even laundering these disposable suits to really maximize their use. So just something to keep in mind. At the end of the day, we know cost is important, but really you need to watch out that you're not jeopardizing your process and your people. So Kimberly-Clark, what we really kind of pride ourselves here is we generally will not be, the absolute lowest cost provider that you can find out in the marketplace. We take a lot of pride in our quality, our supply chain. We have a very, very strong offering, but at the end of the day, we do know that cost is really important. So we've actually structured our portfolio. So we essentially have kind of a good, better, best under each tier. So from a dry particulate protection, we have our CleanGuard A10, our A20, and A30. Our A10 is going to be the value option. We definitely don't want to use the word cheap here because it's still a high quality option, but if price is your huge driver and you still need protection, our A10 is going to be your cost sensitive choice. Same thing with liquid protection. We have our CleanGuard A35, and then as you move up the continuum, our A40 and A45 just have a little bit more, several more bells and whistles as you go up the line. But if you're really looking for that value option, our CleanGuard A35 is really there. And I know, as Dale mentioned before, one of the big values that your distributor partners can use, they help advise you on really where potential cost savings can come from. And Kimberly-Clark's one piece of that puzzle, but across many different other PPE categories, your distributor can be a huge source of information in terms of cost reduction and what you can do there. The next big question and the next big KPI that we look at and how it guides PPE selection is really productivity. So yes, we have output metrics to meet, and we don't want anything to get in the way. So we want our workers who are there every day to be very efficient and make sure that the items coming off the line are happening quickly and in a productive manner. So some things, and this is probably one of the more sensitive areas that can be overlooked when it comes to apparel, because again, the mindset is, in the marketplace a lot of times, just give me that white suit. Well, there is a big difference between whatever suit you will be wearing. And one of the things when it comes to productivity is the question, are the workers comfortable in their garments? If people are often spending time pulling up their garment, there's too much fabric dragging on the ground, whatever, yes, it's safety concerns, but your worker's not comfortable. They're spending valuable time adjusting their PPE when truthfully they should be working on the line helping drive that productive output. Same thing with when it comes to suit, are workers ripping out the garments, causing them to have to replace the suits? So we know that not every worker, very few workers, in fact, are just standing still every day doing their job. Everyone's moving. They're reaching above their head. They're reaching over. And one of the things that happens with disposable apparel is they can rip out at times. And so when you have a big gash in the side of your suit, and it could be that millisecond where that splash of chemical comes in and harms you. It's important that obviously you go and replace that suit, but if you're having to walk halfway across the facility, going to the storage closet, going to the tool crib, that's time that you're spending away from the production line that doesn't need to be so. The other thing too is just like we talked about maybe too much fabric and it dragging on the ground, a restrictive suit. No one likes to be wearing, that pair of jeans that's 3 sizes too tight. And the same thing really translates the same way to coveralls. We don't want the movement to be restricted because at the end of the day, the worker might be worrying about that more than they are, working on the production line. And then the other big question that comes up when it comes to productivity is, does my suit supplier deliver on time? So whether that, in this case, that can be your distributor, as well as the manufacturer in terms of delivering on time. That's really important. For example, if a product is back ordered for 6 months and you have no other replacement, that's drastically going to cut into your productivity. You can hear about production lines that have to risk closing down production because they don't have the right PPE in place. That's a big problem, and you want to ask some of those questions up front. So when it comes to some of the recommendations and watchouts there, one of the first one is to really spend the time and monitor how workers do their job to understand their points of pain. It's great to just watch your workers, but also have engagement with them. Ask them questions about, is this causing you concern? Is it dragging on the ground? Are you not able to do your work as effectively as maybe you could? Understanding those things and working with your distributor and manufacturer sales representative to actually look at those things, monitor those things through a hazard walk, really can be very meaningful to increase your productivity. The other big thing here is to utilize your lean principles. So look for wasted time and wasted energy. I mentioned before, if you rip out a suit and have to walk halfway across the facility to the tool crib, that can be a problem. So look for those elements where people are moving around too much, doing things with the suit that's causing waste. At the end of the day, if you can minimize that or reduce that, you'll drastically increase your productivity, which is very important if this is a metric for you. The other thing is ask up front to your distributor and your manufacturer about service levels. How comfortable do we feel about servicing this? Do you see any watchouts? You obviously don't want to be in the position where at the end of the day you are being back-ordered product for an extended period of time that's putting your production in jeopardy. Ask those questions up front because unfortunately sometimes if you ask them on the back end, it is too late. We have a lot of great distributors that we work with on a regular basis, and it's something that they have processes and procedures in place. And I know Duval is a great partner of ours, and their ultimate goal is to keep you safe and your production running. So they are a good partner to make sure that you're putting a lot of the process and procedure in place so you don't have that problem. But that dialogue is very, very valuable to have up front. So when it comes to productivity, from a Kimberly-Clark Clean Guard example, when we talk about productivity, one of the big things we believe in is what we call our reflex design. So I mentioned before the ANSI standard. The ANSI 101 standard essentially is the bare minimum in terms of the pattern of what a coverall should be designed for. What we believe with a lot of our styles with Kimberly-Clark is we want to actually design the pattern so it's a little bit roomier. So you can see there in this image, the white outline with the red lines is kind of your ANSI minimum, and then the blue is what we make our reflex design style in. So you can see there we provide a little bit more room across the chest as well as the body length. Adding that extra room can make a very big difference, and especially when it comes to kind of the rip outs, we actually are tested and can see that our product is in reflex design is actually 7.5 times less likely to rip out versus ANSI minimum sizing. So this has serious productivity implications. If you're ripping out that much less, it's less time walking across your facility going to the tool crib. It's less time taking off your suit, putting another one on. Those have serious quantifiable productivity improvements, all based on just some minor inches in terms of the fabric. So that's a very, very important attribute that we spend a lot of time talking about and focusing on because it really does make a meaningful difference. On the right-hand side, the other thing that we focus on and pride ourselves on is the vast majority of our portfolio is TAA compliant. So when we say TAA compliant, this is essentially that it's made or transformed in a kind of a country. In our case, a lot of our apparel is manufactured in North America. So we actually have a lot of our, like I mentioned before, our fabric production in the United States, and a lot of our converting gets done in Mexico. And TAA compliance is very, very important, especially when you start talking about government contracts and things of that sort. But from our standpoint, the other benefit that our TAA compliance has in having a North American-centric supply chain is a lot of times what we're able to do is actually, those questions of can you deliver on time? Are you going to be back ordered? The fact that we have a lot of our production here in North America helps alleviate a lot of those concerns. Some of our competitors have coveralls that might be sitting on the water for multiple months at a time, that if you're in back order, it's very difficult to get out of that. We focus our supply chain so that we actually are able to help you meet your productivity goals, and hopefully you're not back ordered for an extended period of time, and we're able to meet your needs on a regular basis. And so I think that's a really important component of what we do to help you all deliver some productivity. The last metric, which has definitely picked up some steam over the last several years, several decades, is really when it comes to sustainability. A lot of companies are saying we need to improve our waste to landfill metrics, and I know Kimberly-Clark has one of these, a sustainability goal that we set forward. It's part of kind of our annual reporting. I know a lot of companies are that way. When it comes to suits, right, the big question you can ask is, can suits be recycled? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but the answer is yes, they can. And the other question is, are there ways to reduce our carbon footprint? So do we need to move coveralls? Do we need to move things from facility to facility that can cause a lot of fuel waste as well as carbon footprint? Some of these are key questions that we need to address. So the first thing when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to disposable apparel, is just truly understanding how much waste is being generated. I think this is something that, disposable apparel is something that's a lot of times taken for granted. And when people take off the suit, it goes directly in the trash can, and the trash can gets emptied in the dumpster, and it disappears. The one thing that I'll say about that is you probably don't realize how expensive that waste management fee is to take it away. And you probably truly don't understand the magnitude of how much is going in the garbage with your PPE at the end of the day. So I think it's important just to be mindful. Take a look at how much you're paying from a waste management perspective to get rid of some of this waste. It might be staggering what you find when it comes to sustainability. The other big aspect is I think there's a lot to be gained here from consulting with your industry peers on how to reduce consumption or increase recycling. An example I'll give, we've actually had some dialogue and engaged with some craft brewers, actually. And it's interesting, in that segment, it's kind of like a small brotherhood and a really tight-knit community in terms of that microbrewers culture, that they're often looking to help each other. If they find something that's working well, especially from a sustainability perspective, they're actually, talking back and forth a little bit and saying, hey, have you considered? There's a lot that can be gained from just paying attention to the industry and what's going on there. I know a lot of sustainability initiatives are focused at trade shows, case studies, things of that sort. Paying attention to that is really, really important because there's a lot to be gained from just kind of paying attention to the landscape and seeing what's out there. One example that how we focus at Kimberly-Clark on sustainability is with our Right Cycle program. This is a really great program and something that we are very, very proud of. And it all started with that exact thing that I mentioned before of paying attention to the amount of waste. We saw across a lot of the industries that we serve, a lot of the segments, that a lot of these apparel pieces were going directly in the garbage. And, as we thought about that, that's obviously not the most sustainable thing that we could be doing. So really what we developed several years ago is our Right Cycle program. So essentially what this does is this takes used apparel, as well as we also include nitrile gloves in our portfolio, that can be recycled. So what happens is at a facility, Kimberly-Clark products go into that Right Cycle box there that you see in the second picture. The Right Cycle box then gets shipped to a recycler. It gets broken down and turned into other processed plastic pellets or nitrile powder that then goes into other industries. So you can see different floors, different flower pots, different chairs that at the end of the day are being recycled out of used garments. This is a really, really amazing story that we like to tell whenever we can, because it's so impactful. And the nice thing about this is, from a recycling standpoint, I know everyone has sustainability metrics that need to be tracked. As part of this Right Cycle program, Kimberly-Clark's able to provide some visual management and actually quantify the amount of savings and the amount of tonnage that you've diverted from a landfill. So this is a really, really important. So this is something that not all of our competitors can offer. So it's something that we're very, very proud of. And the last thing too, we keep it out of keep these products out of a landfill and turn it into other usable goods. So that's something we're super proud of. So we talked quite a bit about really kind of 5 of the main KPIs and some questions and some watch outs and some things to look out for when it comes to some decision-making criteria for disposable apparel. And really, this question I get asked a lot, and we want to keep it kind of short and to the point. And as I mentioned earlier, here are kind of the 5, I guess, watch outs or things to keep in mind from my experience and what I hear from our customer base and our distributors about where suit selection falls short. The first one is going to be product availability. A lot of times we hear calls on a regular basis that this product isn't available. That's a problem. We might have to shut down production, right? We don't like to hear that. And I think Kimberly-Clark has been on the side of that actually benefits our business because one of our competitors wasn't able to meet the need. We were able to step in. But understanding kind of that supply chain and how you and your distributor are going to work through having product on hand is really important, because if you don't have it, it doesn't matter what suit you should be getting, you don't have anything to protect you. So that's very key. The other thing, like we talked a lot about today, is the protection levels versus the hazards. Really understanding what is it that you're protecting against. We don't want you to just be asking for, hey, I need a white suit. Have a more in-depth conversation about hazards, about what level of protection. That really goes a long way in selecting the right PPE. The other big watch out I have there, and I mentioned a little bit before about kind of tape seams, pay very close attention to the seams in the garments. Ourselves, Kimberly-Clark, as well as our competitors, have several different seams that as you go up the continuum, different seams are needed for different levels of protection. So seams can be one of the main areas where exposure can happen. So please pay particularly close attention to those seams and ask questions about seams. It sounds like a minimal thing, but it can make a world of difference. The other thing that we find, especially when we look at kind of that cost KPI and folks that are very solely focused on cost, there's a very big difference between cost per piece versus cost in use. So when I say that, if I'm paying $1 per coverall, that's really the cost per piece. When I'm saying cost in use, that really extrapolates it over the whole life of the garment. So for example, if I buy a garment that is $1 per piece but have to wear 10 of them over a work shift, you might be better off spending a little bit more to get a really nice garment that you might only have to use 1. So really understanding that, doing the math, understanding what is truly the cost in use of this makes a very big difference. The other big aspect here is uncomfortable employees leads to non-compliance. And one of the best examples I can give is, take eyewear, for example. I know we're talking about apparel today, but eyewear is a great one. A lot of times what you hear with a complaint about safety eyewear is there's a pinch behind the ears. What happens when someone's getting pinched behind their ears is they put their glasses on the top of their head for 2 seconds. Well, unfortunately, those 2 seconds are when an incident can occur. And the same thing happens with apparel, right? It takes you a moment to rip off the sleeves because you're too hot, leave it unzipped because you're too hot. Uncomfortable employees, that leads to non-compliance, and it leads to those milliseconds and seconds where incidents can occur. So it's really important to observe your workforce, talk to your workforce, and really understand what are their pain points. And then the last big fallacy here is just all white suits are the same, right? If you're asking your distributor just for another white suit, you're probably doing a disservice to your workers as well as yourself. It's great to have an in-depth dialogue. Ask a lot of the questions that we talked about today. Have a lot of the point of view that we talked about today in terms of the watch-outs and things to take advantage of. Right? This webinar, it's not very easy to say, if you have this hazard, do this, because we know that every single facility and every single usage application is very different. So that's where you need to rely on your partners. Ask questions of your distributor, ask questions of your manufacturer sales rep, and ultimately they are a great resource to help you make these decisions. At the end of the day, we're all fighting the same battle. We want your workforce to be safe every day and go home exactly the same way they came. So that's really an important aspect of that. So at this point, that wraps up our content, and I'll turn it back over to Jamie to go from there.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mark. Would like to thank Mark and Dale. Really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate the audience for joining in. So we'd like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dale. Take care and stay safe.
Likewise. Thanks.
Thank you.